Hello, my name is Charlie Fairbairn, and in this video we're not going to really be covering a tutorial. This is more an appraisal of whether Flutterflow is the right product for you. Now currently, with the myriad of new products hitting the market, such things as Lovable and Cursor for instance, we're really spoilt for choice. And before anyone, whether an individual or a team, embarks upon a new project, it may well be very worthwhile evaluating whether Flutterflow is the right product for you. Now I'm going to tell you what this isn't. This isn't a criticism or a run through or a tutorial about Flutterflow itself, because Flutterflow is in itself an absolutely brilliant platform, but it doesn't suit every single scenario and every single case. So we're going to run through in this appraisal how you go through the decision-making process to decide whether this product, this platform, is right for you. Now, I have actually created a complete slideshow for this particular appraisal, but I'm not going to run through it verbatim. I think that is not the YouTube format that I want to adopt, but I do want you to be aware of the fact that I've gone through every single point of consideration in doing so. And also this presentation is available for download on my resources page if perhaps you want to use that for a presentation to your company or to your client. So, where to begin? Well, at the beginning, of course. And here is a list of considerations that I'm going to be running through within this appraisal. And each of these is really a criteria, not in itself, but needs to be taken in consideration with all the others to get to the final decision of whether you should be running with Flutterflow or not. And we'll start with, is the application for you or for a client? I think this is really important because it really dictates how much freedom you've got, particularly over design and who you're trying to satisfy. We'll elaborate on that later. How much coding experience do you have? I mean, in Flutterflow, you can, if you want, get into custom functions and custom widgets in great detail, but you don't need to. Some of the other platforms that maybe deliver products don't require any coding experience at all. So you need to really consider how much you've got and how much you're prepared to acquire in terms of a skill set. What are your time frames? Well, you know, some of the products, again, have a learning curve. Flutterflow has a learning curve of at least 2 weeks to get to the beginner stage, and we'll run through that as well. The design. I think it's really important to understand that Flutterflow is a design-led product. It is not a prompt led product, and as a result you have greater control over the look and the feel of the application. I think that's really important. If your client's going to give you a Figma or a specific design, that is going to be a consideration. What platforms are you developing for? Well, many of the other examples that I've just given to you are going to develop in a language such as TypeScript or React, for instance, whereas Flutterflow actually does not develop in that language, but it does create web, Android, iOS, Linux, and Windows versions. So if you are developing specifically a mobile application, that is a consideration too. How does Flutter compare with the other ones? And we're going to be looking maybe at some considerations such as its speed and the ease at which you can publish. What is the end product? Many people ask me, can you create a completed production-ready product using Flutterflow? Well, I'm going to answer that question in a roundabout way now, but in more detail later. I have actually done it. We have created. I've been a member of an individual doing prototyping, took the prototype to an MVP to a final product, and that product is extremely sophisticated and is the end product. So we'll cover that as well. Are you working in a team? If you're working in a team, then version control is extremely important, and we're going to cover that as well. You know, what happens when your project goes wrong? Have you got a way of going back a stage? And if you're in a team, that is even more important. And also, finally, what are the alternatives? I've included here Dreamflow, which is probably the nearest competitor, even though it is, of course, a product from the Flutterflow team. Cursor, Lovable, Bolt, AI Studio, Firebase Studio, and Claude, they're all slightly different from Flutterflow, but we're going to cover that as well. And finally, in the final section, we're going to sum that all up. So running through the slides one by one, we are going to start with the personal project, how that will impact your decision-making process, whether it be a client project, how much experience if you're a beginner developer, what you can expect from Flutterflow, same for the intermediate, what you can expect and what you should be able to do, and of course the advanced 2 years plus. 2 years may not sound like a lot, but it's enough. Flutterflow learning timelines, we'll run through that, what you should expect to invest. Flutterflow versus other products there, and we go into specific details with React and Next.js. We also go to native development of Swift and Kotlin. We also look at whether this can be a production-ready application, and we look at team collaboration and version control. And finally, we look at the alternative platform comparisons that we've got. I've included Bubble in there, and what we should use for the criteria to make your decision. And finally, the conclusion and next steps, my recommendation as to what you do before you make that absolute final decision. It really does go without saying that the only way really to understand Flutterflow is to dive in at the deep end. And of course, you need to teach yourself, and the only way you can do that is by starting a personal project. I've been the mentor to nearly a dozen projects with people, so I do get to understand some of the limitations that I find and the traps that people fall into. And I think one of them, and the major one, is overestimating their personal abilities at understanding how code works. Now, it doesn't require, in my opinion, that you know how to code, but it does help to understand how code is structured. And the other thing that I think is really important to say is that the problem with developing for yourself is that you tend to be a little bit undisciplined. If you're going to work for a client, it's really important to understand that it is the client's word and what they want that is important. And you lack quite a lot of freedom within the development cycle. So I think the tip here is to try and be as disciplined as possible within the development of your first personal project. And the second is do go and have a lot of YouTube videos, look at those, whether they be mine or they be other people's. It's really important to understand how code is structured and how you build up not just a Flutterflow project, but in actual fact, any project. Now, taking a quick look at the what you should expect from the experience level that you've got. At a beginner, the beauty of Flutterflow is that you are able to use the drag and drop interface there. It's very visual, it's very intuitive, and at a beginner I would estimate, and we'll come on to the timeframes on this, that in actual fact about 2 weeks will get you to a point at which you will be able to create your first project. What I do not think probably you would be able to do within that kind of time frame is to be able to do any kind of custom coding. Now, for custom coding, and I would say we're talking about an intermediary level. I don't necessarily think it's 1 to 2 years. I think we're talking about maybe a couple of months working with Flutterflow. You should be able to customize some of those widgets. And if you're working for a client, you're going to find that sometimes that they literally don't. They'll give you a specification that isn't part of the built-in widgets of Flutterflow. And in these cases, you are going to have to resort to doing custom code. Now, fortunately, and I've got other tutorials that cover this, you can actually use tools, particularly like Cursor and Claude, to write all of those for you. Vibreflow is another one that can do that for you. So even though you will be writing custom code, you may not actually be doing it yourself. And if we're talking about advanced developers, well, again, that's just taking it a step further. We may be looking at more involved custom coding on that front, and maybe even considering putting all of the widgets into custom code so that you can take that project even further, maybe converting it into a pure Flutter project. So those are the considerations really on the experience level that you would require. And here I've got, basic apps 1 to 2 weeks, intermediate 1 to 2 months, advanced customizations 3 to 6, mastery 6 to 12. Doesn't quite comply with the slides I just did with the skill set, but I think you get the idea of that. I believe what really sets Flutterflow apart from the rest, and I'm really referring to products like Bolt.new and Lovable, is that it develops native Android, iOS, and web content, the web content being JavaScript. And Lovable and Bolt, they both work in TypeScript, so they're working in a form of React TypeScript. And if you are developing for mobile, really, there is no particular choice between those two, because Flutterflow is the only one of that kind of category that does develop native iOS and mobile apps. So if the consideration is I'm developing for mobile, then that is a big tick for Flutterflow. Now, the other things that are also good about the Flutterflow is that it is a progressive web app, which means that the code can get downloaded onto the hard drive of the person who's using it, which means that it's even more responsive and faster. This is the modern way of doing it without actually going through and creating an APK or an iOS application. It is a simulated version of that, and very, very good. We can see here that some of the limitations of that is that the performance of React is actually really quite stunning. Now, I have to say that Flutterflow, particularly with its new abilities to use the canvas for the redraws, is particularly fast now. However, I don't think it matches quite in speed with React. When I say limited SEO optimization features, well, there's actually a feature of React as well. Neither of them are particularly good for SEO optimization because they don't render HTML. Therefore, a link in there won't specifically say where it's going. It's sort of all built into the code. But I have to say that I'm not a great believer in the current thinking behind SEO optimization. I think that Google are smart enough to realize that these new products are not written in HTML, and they're perfectly capable of going through your application without necessarily having HTML there. Limited control over web-specific optimizations, loading times. Flutterflow takes care of that and uses something called tree shaking, which means that although the initial code may look a bit bloated, it will remove the code that it's not needed. And the other thing is that Flutter Web is, and Flutter generally, is a less mature language than the React. And that's going to impact you in two respects. One of those is that you're going to find that the AI models haven't got quite as much information to be able to write that code for you, and they do make more mistakes than they do in TypeScript or React. And the other thing is that if you're looking to build a team, there are less people out there who know Flutter and Flutterflow than there are React. So those are the considerations there. But at the end of the day, I think that there are other products. I think Bubble is one that will develop in iOS and Android, but Flutterflow is miles ahead on that front. In a way, I think that Dreamflow, by the same team as Flutterflow, is in a category of its own. Firstly, it is really quite a relatively immature product, and although I have used it and tested it out, I don't think, in my opinion, it's quite ready yet. That does not mean it won't be. I was able to recreate here a project that I had originally done in Flutterflow, and I imported the image, and it made quite a good job initially of translating that. Now, these should be buttons, they're not clickable, for instance. And I had actually got a display over here. You can see the images in the carousel over here on the right should be square and separated by 5 pixels. The carousel should be horizontally scrollable. I did have an image up here so that when you can see this is not scrollable, and my image has vanished. So I'm just going to ask it to put that back in again and see what happens. Now, in a way, we are talking here about a combination of being definitely design-oriented, design-driven, as well as prompt-driven, and it does produce Flutter code, and therefore by producing Flutter code, it does mean that we can create iOS and Android applications. So to a certain extent, this is an extension or a different approach from Flutterflow, but it does have some of the same advantages. I think that if we're again looking at prompt-driven mobile application development, then this might be what you're looking for. It certainly has a fairly rapid development time. There is a less of a learning curve on it. But as I say, if you're still wanting to get exactly what you want, it's going to be tricky. For instance, I want this green button here to drop down and there'll be lots more menu items. Now, I was able to do that in Flutterflow. I'm not sure how I can describe that in an English language in order to be able to convert that into a meaningful application feature. So, and the other thing that I think is worth pointing out here, it is actually incredibly slow. And I am wondering whether it might not be better to use something like Cursor, which could equally do what we're doing here. And I think it would allow us to use, for instance, our own LLM models, whether it be Claude or ChatGPT 5 or any of the other ones. We could select those ourselves, and I believe I'd be right in saying that it would be much faster. You see, I'm waiting here. I'm going to put it on pause and see whether it does fix my problem. Hold on a second. Okay, I will just let that carry on for a minute while I also explain really that I think the choice here is whether, again, you want to be design oriented or not. Personally, I would probably run with Flutterflow and Cursor as having the benefits that I want. And if I was to just go straight into a Flutter program, I'd probably just run with Cursor. However, when this is capable of importing projects perhaps that you've created in Cursor, that is a feature that is coming, and a few other aspects to it, maybe even the conversion of Figmas into a project. And when it's able to translate the image a little bit better, so for instance these buttons are clickable, then I think this could be a very, very good product. But as I say, for me right now, it is immature. Okay, just as a final conclusion of it, asking it to correct its mistake, it didn't. But that is not to say that this is a drawback of specifically of Dreamflow. That could easily have happened as well in Cursor. I also think that Cursor, in terms of the use of tokens, the use of credits, if you like, is going to be cheaper as well. That is not to put cold water on what is a very, very good product, but I do think that at the moment it's got some stiff competition, and I personally probably will not be running with Dreamflow until they have ironed out the kinks. Now let's just consider for one moment whether Flutterflow can be used for production-ready applications. I think one of the most common questions that I see on the Reddit forums and elsewhere is the application scalable? Now, I think that one needs to have a fundamental understanding is that the back end of Flutterflow is taken care of by almost predominantly by either by Firestore for the database or by Superbase. And the combination of those two is that what can typically reduce the scalability of a project is the databases, and whether we can hit that database 10,000 times a minute. The answer is it's all taken care of by Google, and it's all taken care of by Superbase. So it's not really a consideration. One also needs to consider that the application on the web application is loaded into memory into the browser. So it does that once. So everybody, if you like, has got their own copy of the actual application itself and is running a copy of it. And if it's a progressive web app, that's going to be on the hard drive too. It's going to be memory if it's not, and it's going to be in your application on your hard drive again if it's an application that you've installed from Play or the App Store. So the answer to that question is yes, it's infinitely scalable. Certainly with 50,000 users without a problem. I do not know what the absolute limit is, but if you've got 50,000 users, you're doing very well indeed, and I shouldn't worry about scalability. The other aspect we need to consider is, how do you integrate Firebase and Superbase into Flutterflow? They have made that extremely easy. There are some caveats there on the authorization processes that are involved with Superbase, and there are videos on how to get around that. The Firebase side of things is very simple, and again, lots of YouTube videos on that, so do go and have a look at those. Those are taken care of. They're also taken care of, by the way, in Lovable and the other TypeScript. They connect to databases also very easily, but there's no advantage of the TypeScript over that, and there's no advantage of the TypeScript over scalability either. Now, I've run through, now, as I mentioned earlier, I was an individual person doing prototyping of a particular application, then joined a team when we took that into an MVP, which was slightly more advanced. We were absolutely pixel perfect, working on a Figma design that had been provided by the client from a design team. We were able to do pixel perfect renditions of the Figma using a combination of custom code and built-in widgets on Flutterflow, and we were able to convert that into a production-ready application, which is probably of the sophistication of a cross between, say, Netflix and something else. But that was an example of where it shows that it actually can be done. The only caveat, and I think it's on this slide that I would draw your attention to, which is also in the previous one, is that if you're just developing for web, then I think React may be better. So the Lovables and the Bolt.new of this world might be better for that. And if you're really just doing sort of kind of like a landing page, either those or AI Studio or Firebase Studio do those really, really well. And if you're a bit old-fashioned, to be honest, then you could always go back to WordPress for those things, which are hugely SEO optimized and serve a certain purpose, but they're not really applications. One of the critical considerations when working in a team is the version controlling. Version controlling, as I'm sure you well know, is the ability for people to be writing different parts of an application and for them to be merged into the main application when that code has been approved and tested. It's quite a complex process because you may find at times that there are some overlap, that one team member has edited a piece of code and another team member has edited the same piece of code elsewhere. So version controlling is not only complex, it is hugely critical. And if you do want to roll back to a previous version, you don't want to roll back beyond the point at which the good code is removed as well. So version control is extremely important. Now, in an ideal world, Flutterflow would use GitHub or something very similar and take it completely outside the Flutterflow project. But I need to tell you, it does not. Yes, it does advertise, and you can take your project out into GitHub for looking at and analyzing, and for instance, working on the custom code in products like Cursor. What you cannot do is start editing and changing the main Flutterflow code that's been written by Flutterflow. If you do that, there is no way to upload that back into your Flutterflow project, so you can't do that. So you really are in the hands of the Flutterflow's built-in versioning. Now, I know that has come on in leaps and bounds since they first introduced it about a year ago, where I'm going to tell you that it was pretty buggy and it was pretty frustrating. When it works, it is more than adequate. It's not fantastic, but it's more than adequate. And the working mechanisms on that are that you should be able to work in branches, individual branches, and those get merged together. Now, there are other ways in Flutterflow of creating what would be staging. So there would be a development and a production version. And I think it's a bit misleading within the Flutterflow project that you can use where they say that you can create two different versions, the development and the production. Actually, all they're doing is swapping out the database. The actual code base is the same. So I think I need to make you aware of that. So on the plus side, the version controlling is built into Flutterflow. On the minus side, it may not be quite as mature and developed if you are used to working in something like GitHub. So to be a little bit clearer as to what I mean by that, within Flutterflow, you have something called the dev environments. And the dev environments basically allows you to create a production version and to create a development version. And depending on your plan, also dictates to how many of these you can actually have, whether you can have a staging version. And here what you do is you add a variable, and that variable is the variable that is going to swap out depending on which version you are working on. And it is suitable for changing the database, and it's suitable for changing API calls. It will not change the base code underneath. So that is something that one should be aware of. And then the other aspect here, of course, we've got our branches. Again, this is dependent to a certain extent on the plan that you've got, the team plan, as to how many branches that you can create here. I believe my plan only allows for a main at the moment. When I was working in a team, each member could have their own branch, and that would then get merged at the end of each day, is what we did, to ensure that we didn't have too much of a build up and a pile up over there. I suppose there is one question that's worth answering that isn't really a part of any of my slide presentations, and that is, how do I work? Well, I'm going to tell you that my absolute favorite technique for developing a mobile application is a combination of Flutterflow and Cursor. Now, just to give you an insight into how that works, and I have got separate tutorials on this, which I will put in the links below, is to work in both. And the way that one does that is basically by editing the code on one's hard drive that is connected to your Flutterflow that's out up there in the cloud. And so consequently, and I'm not going to go into the details of how that actually works, this here is my Flutterflow code. Now, the limitations are that I can only work on anything that's in the custom code folder. Now, that gives me quite a lot of flexibility. So, for instance, here, I'm creating a custom login form. And I created that custom login form actually using Claude in this case, but I could have used Vibreflow or any of the other AI code generators that I'd wanted to. And it's created this fairly sophisticated custom widget, should I ever want a custom login form. And I have inserted that into a Flutterflow over in the normal way, which would be here in our widgets. You can see I've got my Flutter JSON converter and my login form here. What I actually do is develop over in Cursor, copy that code back into Flutterflow, save it, and that will then be reflected automatically back into Cursor. And as I say, it's the technique that I work with, and I would kind of recommend it because I've looked at all the other ways of doing things. And I do think that if you're creating mobile applications, one can't go wrong really with Flutterflow. Okay, it's time to wrap up with the conclusion and next steps. Let's dwell a little bit on this slide. The decision to use Flutterflow should be based on a careful evaluation of your specific requirements, team capabilities, and long-term goals. Consider starting with a small pilot project to evaluate the platform's fit for your needs before committing to larger implementations. So basically, test before you commit to it. It's going to be an investment of your time, and time is money. And therefore, the more that research and testing that you do, the more likely you are going to make the right decision. So do build a simple prototype in Flutterflow. Do, as I said at the beginning, if you're just leaping into it, be disciplined. Work from a Figma. Create a Figma from something like Stitch, which was actually AI generated, but at least to get you into the discipline of writing from the perspective of a client giving you the specification of what they want. Evaluate team options and learning curve. Do remember that there are less people out there with Flutter and Flutterflow experience than there are with React. Compare development speed versus customization needs. Really, if you go with the React route, they're very, very quick indeed. You can do something in 2 or 3 days. Flutterflow is not like that, but in Flutterflow, you've got the ability to be able to get the product that you actually want. It's design-led. It's what the client says, I want exactly this. You'll struggle to do that in the prompt-driven versions of the AI revolution that we're going through at the moment. And the other consideration, which is not here, is that, of course, Flutterflow is well ahead on creating iOS and Android applications. And if that's important to you, then do take that into consideration before adopting any of the other options there. The total cost of ownership and subscription and maintenance. If you are working in a team, for instance, one has to consider the cost of each seat. It's reasonable, but it's well off free. It is a consideration. It's a monthly expense that you or your client are going to have to take on. You can go a long way if you're an individual on the $39 plan at the moment. That is what I've actually downgraded to, because I don't see that there are tremendous advantages in the $80 seat. Just a little piece of advice there. But the overall cost of the project, the number of hours, how much you're paying people, the skills resource available are all going to be important in the overall decision. Now, I hope this has been useful to you. Having worked in all the environments that we're talking about, individual, MVP, prototyping, team, version controlling, I am in a position to say that the experience has been good. It has not always been great, and the problems can arise when there are Flutterflow bugs, but they tend to fix those, generally speaking, reasonably rapidly. Now, they've got a bit of a backlog at the moment, we all know that, but I do have my faith that Flutterflow will fix those. So bearing all that in mind, you should now be well armed and have the information you need to make a good, calculated decision on that. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and do not forget to like and subscribe to my channel here. It keeps the wheels of progress well oiled. Thank you very much.